So Manson never actually did any of the killings, and there's controversy over this day debated. People say Charlie made me do it. I've reformed now. I need to get released from prison. Some of the women got released. Charles Tex Watson is still inside. Like I touched on earlier, I think he's about 20, 21 years old when the order was put out to go on this killing spree. I think they killed about 7 people. Sharon Tate had the baby inside of her, 8.5 months pregnant, begged to be murdered after she gave birth to the baby. And this guy just continued to kill her and told the women to write witchy things on the walls.
Yeah, a helter skelter, you know, piggies, different things like that. Um, and but they cut the baby actually out of Sharon Tate's body. That was one of the big horrendous things that they did. But the thing was is that people don't really have to understand. I knew Charles Tex Watson for my whole 7 years at CMC, and he actually for 4 years lived in the cell directly above me. And he had a single cell in the honor unit where their cells were only locked for like 2.5 hours a night. The rest of the time they had free reign. Um, and the thing was, but what he had going for him, which helped him out with the family, he was tall. He was considered to be attractive and athletic.
He's 6'9", wasn't he?
No, he was. He's about 6'4", I think.
Okay.
But he was tall, athletic, um, and he had that kind of Texas drawl that lured girls in, and he actually was the one that got most of the girls to come to the ranch and
Right.
got them in. But he was the one that went and picked the girls and said, Charlie says we have to go do this. So the girls never actually heard Charlie say it. They just heard Charlie Tex Watson say it. So there's that kind of a distinction on there. But the thing was that he was on death row, and but he was a part of the class of 72. In 1972, California decided to throw out the death penalty, being that it was not, they didn't feel it was humane at that time or for whatever reason. And so at that point in time, I think it was about 170 people came off death row, and they were given life with possibility sentences. And at that time, he was sent directly down to CMC. So he went right off death row down to a medium security prison. And in part, they did that because they wanted to try to break up a lot of the people off death row. So they were sending him to what few prisons they had at the time. Because at that time, you only had 2 maximum security prisons, Folsom and San Quentin. And then you had 9 other men's prisons. And so they had to kind of spread them out. So he went down there. And
Only 2 maximum security prisons back then. So all the people on YouTube who were saying you couldn't possibly know these people, everyone's going to know everyone within those prisons.
right.
Yeah.
The only time we wouldn't know them is if they were actually in death row. We didn't get to actually associate with them. But when they came out to be taken somewhere, the guards would yell, "Turn towards the wall, dead man walking." And so you might get a glimpse over your shoulder who they're walking, and you may know from a news thing or something like that. But anyway, so I meet Tex Watson down there, and at this point in time, you used to get these notices sent to you when you first got there, saying your mandatory requirement to come to the chapel, yoke fellows. Well, I didn't know what a yoke fellow was at the time, and I took kind of a personal offense to being told I had to come to anywhere, but to go to the chapel it just kind of seemed odd. So I'd gone over there, and I come to find out that we had a free staff prison chaplain, but he was always off grounds. At the time, when I got there, and I met him. Actually, it was 1986. When I met him, he was the inmate prison chaplain. He had complete control over the Protestant chapel. All other free staff that came in and ran chapel programs in there, whether they be Seventh-day Adventists or they be Latter-day Saints or Jehovah's Witness, they had to go to him to get permission to schedule a service. Beneath him, he had designated some inmate deacons, and so he had complete control. He also decided if you could come to services or do programs that were being held in the chapel. But he was commonly referred to that when he preached, he would preach the gospel according to text. And he actually had written a book called Will You Die For Me? And it was supposedly about his prison conversion, which had actually come about because there had been this evangelistic preacher named Chaplain Ray, and he'd gone all over the country and he'd met all these infamous killers and stuff, and he'd get them all to convert. And then he wrote a book called God's Prison Gang, and Tex Watson was one of the people within that. And but through that God's Prison Gang and through his involvement with Chaplain Ray and getting involved in the chapel and becoming a prison chaplain, he actually had met the daughter of another chaplain and married her. And he had started his own ministry called Abounding Love Ministry. And he was getting tax-free donations sent to him. So while his wife's on welfare, getting money for their children that he was able to have, because once he no longer was on death row, he could get family visits. So he got married, started having children, got his family on welfare, and was basically working the system from every angle he could. Got a ministry started, got free money coming in that way, which paid for his family's house, which was a church property, not his. All their vehicles were church vehicles, not his.
I recently did a video about the Italian mafia playing the system, but I guess they've got nothing on Charles Tex Watson.
Yeah, and so he...
3 children didn't he end up having?
I believe he had
conjugal
3.
visits.
Yeah.
They don't do conjugal visits anymore.
Well, no, they just brought him back, but they have certain restrictions. But we did lose him for a while. And part of the reason we lost him was people were complaining that people like Watson had children. The other problem was that they had a lot of lifers that would get married, have a couple of kids, get tired of that wife, divorce her, get another wife, get a couple more kids, divorce that one. And they were doing this. So now you had all these single women with children. They're all going on welfare. And that kind of got out to the public, and the public got kind of tired.
And I watched a video of his parole hearing. So it's like they have these families, and then they construct this and bring the family to the parole hearing and say, look, I've got this family now. I've got to support my family. I've got to get out. And in Charles Tex Watson's case, he was so crafty. He had the daughter of one of his double homicide victims lobby for him to get released.
Yes, he did.
But then Sharon Tate's mom stepped in,
right,
and she said, what kind of example does this set? What kind of justice is this? If you're releasing this serial killer, when he gets released, Sharon's not going to come out the grave and get released. All these other victims are not come out the grave and get released. And he's, as far as when I looked on the internet, he's still inside right now, serving time.
Yes, he is. But his thing was that I believe Sharon Tate's mom is now passed, but her sister has picked up the torch. But they have the Sharon Tate Foundation. But because of that, they also tended to send out through technology, through emails, to people to do email, please don't let this guy out things for most lifers coming up for parole, even if they had nothing to do with all this. But so Tex and I had a lot of major discussions and a lot of major arguments about different things. We were never cordial from day one, because I ran over there and I explained to him, you don't tell me to come somewhere. I don't know who you think you are. And of course he goes, well, I'm Charles Watson. And I go, oh, so you're Tex Watson. No, I'm Charles Watson. And then, like I said, that book he wrote, Will You Die For Me? He used to sell those to inmates. But if you wanted to have it inscribed to you, he would charge you an extra $20, but he would only inscribe it as Charles Watson, never Tex. And a couple of guys tried to get him put Tex, and he would just absolutely say, oh, no, I don't know who that person is any longer, things like that. But like I said, there were a few incidents that we had to where I aggravated him in ways that probably would not be considered British nice. One time after one of our big arguments, because he also had gone and tried to intimidate one of cellie I had who was actually partially disabled.
And this was the argument was over him intimidating the cellie.
Yeah, I'm telling you, my cellie had been a thalidomide baby, and so he had a shrunken arm and stuff like that. And so he was telling the guy that was God's punishment and blah blah blah, and so I really upped my cellie. My cellie wanted to go stab him. I told him, no, I want to see you get out one day. So I went and I got him. And so he basically told me that, back off, or, he'd have 40,000 angels come down and kick my ass. And he wasn't talking about hell's angels. He was talking about heavenly angels. And I told him anytime, anywhere, that type of thing. So I went back to the house, and the guy on the tier goes, hey, I got something you might want to listen to. And he happened to have the Beatles' White Album. It had Helter Skelter on it. I said, let me borrow it for the night. So I played it through the vent in my cell, Helter Skelter, over and over for hours. And then I slid it out across to another guy's cell who was able to get it back. So the next morning when the officers came to my cell looking for that tape, I told them, what tape? And then, of course, I said, well, he must be having a flashback or something. And so they could never, they believed I did it. They just couldn't prove I did it. But but the worst part of my thing with Tex, the day I left CMC going to a level 2, because in 93, they determined if you met level 2 minimum medium security thing, you had to leave the medium because they needed room for more medium people. I get transferred out. At that time, he'd had a number of death threats on him that were being taken somewhat serious. He was also, I should say, the only inmate that ever actually was allowed to wear an alarm beeper on his ankle. So if somebody tried to rush him, he could hit it and the guards would respond to it.
Wow.
So funny enough, on a transport bus, and I don't know if you ever experienced these yourself, you weren't allowed to talk on the bus. You had a person in the back of the bus with a shotgun telling you don't make sounds, blah, blah, blah. And you had a person in the front of the bus with a shotgun. And then you had the driver. So we get on and they tell you the only person you can talk to in a very low voice is the person you sit next to. I get on the bus. I sit down. He gets on the bus because he's being transferred to Mule Creek. He sits behind me. And the moment the bus left the prison, he wants to suddenly start talking to me about what do you think it's going to be like at the next prison? What do you think? How do and of course, I'm getting a guard yelling at me, quit talking back there. I'm not doing the talking. Suddenly I'm getting really miffed because I want to stand up, but we're waist chained and ankle chained and handcuffed and all that. They stop the bus a couple times, come up, and they give us the lecture. The problem is I'm the person they keep giving the lecture to more than him. So after about 14, 15 hours on the bus, we finally get to Mule Creek to drop him off. And there were another number of other inmates that were getting off Mule Creek. So at the time I get there, there's only a couple of us on the bus that are going to other than Mule Creek. They're unloading the property off the side of the bus we're on. So they take everybody else off. They take them into their R&R, their receiving area. And the next thing I know, they're taking the property out, and they've got Tex Watson's property right there. It's got his name all over. And he had like a word processor with discs that the court had ordered him to have and stuff. And it said, warning, be careful, this side up. And this cop taps on the window. We both look down. He smiles at Tex. He picks this box high up over his head and slams it to the ground as hard as he can. Then he proceeded to take every other box out of there and slam it on top. Then he started kicking the thing all the way over to the wall. Tex is huffing and puffing at this time. Suddenly this sergeant comes on and goes, well, Mr. Charles Tex Watson, come on down. You're the winner on The Price is Right. Walks him off the bus, puts his face against the wall, and brought out 3 of the largest correctional officers I saw because they all caused him to be dwarfed. They were just so huge. And they're just yelling at him. And then they just kind of manhandle him into the R&R. And the other 3 of us on the bus were all sitting there looking at each other going, glad we're not him.
That's what you get for cutting babies out of.
And so then we went off, we left, and then I went to my next prison. But that was my last dealing with him.
So you said that you taunted him with the Helter Skelter music. Did he have any plots or schemes against you that he put into play?
Well, there were, like I said, well, that if that it was because he had done that. When that came down to it, he realized at that point in time that I'm not gonna play by, because like he did things like he'd have somebody go over to the weight pile and pour like sticky honey or stuff on the weights. There were a couple times when I was going out to a certain area on the yard, I was going to be sitting down because they had few trees. He'd have somebody go out there and water it down so you couldn't sit on it. And he was doing that kind of thing. So we had this tit for tat. But the thing was, I don't know if he really knew much about me other than the fact that I wasn't impressed by him. But the thing was that there were other guys that said, could you leave him alone? And stuff. And these were usually guys that worked in the church with him and stuff. And I tell him, it's real simple. Tell him to stay away from me and my celly and the people I hang out with. And we got no issues. But there would always be these little tiny things. But yes, but I never had a concern that he was going to do anything bigger than that.
So the other guy who I've not really saw any of his stuff on YouTube or on the internet is Bruce Davis, who was a Manson family member who you interacted with.
Yeah, and Bruce Davis I also knew for the 7 years I was there at CMC. Now, the thing is that whereas Tex Watson was quite manipulative and he quite bullied people with the chapel thing, Bruce Davis had converted to Christianity. He was very quiet. He would talk to people. He did run a couple of Bible classes stuff. But his thing was listen to the word in the Bible, read the Bible. I'm not the authority here and stuff. And so it was a much greater thing.
What had he done?
Well, his thing was